Hello, this is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. Yesterday I recorded a long video which gave an interview with a Russian lady um in Paris, as well as talking about some of the moral issues about the nature of good versus evil. And then when I was uploading the video, um, it hadn't even been uploaded. It was in the process of unloaded, and then I got this message flashing across my screen that it had got a copyright strike on account of the Russian material. But that doesn't seem credible to me because it was blocked midstream before it had even been uploaded. So there's no way any company in Russia or anyone where else would have had time to make a complaint on copyright because it hadn't even come on stream. So I'm trying to redo this, and I'm trying to learn how to use video editing software, which I'm finding incredibly difficult to master. So I'm doing this, and it's not going to be a very professional job, but all the material will be there. So I hope you'll be patient and just watch the video as it is in its present form, providing I can get this uploaded. Monuments. Okay, in Syria. And I'm just going to go to this. So a mere 8 hours after the cathedral caught fire, the French authorities were able to rule out arson as a cause of the fire. So, to quote from the article here, arson has been ruled out as a cause of the catastrophic blaze that ripped through Notre Dame Cathedral. The exact cause of the fire remains unknown, but French media have quoted a local fire brigade as saying investigations were underway to see if it was linked to restorations. So, the flames are scarcely extinguished, and the authorities don't yet know the exact cause of the fire, but they're able to say that. They can say that it's not arson. Have they investigated it? Well, that's a story for another video, because I want to discuss some of the different aspects of this. The language used by the French state to describe the meaning of Notre Dame is along the lines of architectural monument, or the headline of Democracy Now! Today says France mourns as fire rips through historic Notre Dame Cathedral that has stood for centuries. So it's stood for centuries. That's its main contribution. And the view of liberal pundits in the West who are telling us what we should be thinking, that is its sole significance, is one of as an architectural monument or as a historic monument. Well, I can tell you that's what the Soviets used to call their own treasures. They were called pamятники архитектуры, architectural monuments, and on this ground they looked after their historical heritage reasonably well. Those churches that weren't looted and dynamited, and those palaces that weren't allowed to fall into disrepair, were looked after. So in some significant cases, the Soviets restored palaces such as Petrodvorets near St. Petersburg that were destroyed by the Nazis. So this is how it looks to me. Macron is like a contemporary Leonid Brezhnev who wants to maintain architectural monuments every bit as much of a liar, probably more, and certainly every bit of a Philistine. So I've not gone through all the commentary in Western media, but I woke to this piece from Russian TV and an assessment that's far more informed and way, way more heartfelt than anything I've seen in Western media. So I want to share that with you now. In broad terms, the kind of invasion of Europe, and I gave full coverage to this lady on the left who was talking. She rushed to Paris to be there when she heard about the fires, and she gave her very, very apposite comments about all of this. Now, my video was 30 minutes and I was uploading it, and then towards the end of it, I got this message. Now, this happened while I was in the midst of uploading the video, so there's no way that any Kidu Entertainment of Russia could block it on copyright grounds, because it hadn't even gone up yet, and it was blocked kind of in midstream, as it were. So this is a case of absolute copyright. There's some terrible stuff coming out on this, which indicates that absolutely this was a case of arson, and this is being suppressed at all levels. So I'm going to do my best to get the information out, and this is a bit of an experiment because I'm not doing anything with copyright, because I'm going to read. I've made a transcript of what she said. That's not all of it, so I'm going to read this to you. A Christian sanctuary burns down. Let's not forget that first and foremost, it's not a monument of architecture, but a monument and symbol of Christian Europe, Christian France. The country whose citizens sacrificed their life on the scaffold for faith, for their homeland, for honour, duty and love. All French kings after Rennes used to be crowned here and used to marry here. Great state and ecclesiastical acts used to take place here. That's why this catastrophe is a menacing omen for all of us, not just Latin Catholic Europe that has strayed from its Christian values, as we often say. Merkel called it the symbol of European values. Previously, she used to say that the various minority parades were the symbols of the European values, along with human rights exclusively in their modern interpretation. No, in fact, that's the way it is, because Notre Dame is a sanctuary. And I have to say, yeah, not an architectural monument. It's a symbol of European civilization as a Christian civilization, first of all. Christianity are the values of Europe. First and foremost, thou shalt not kill or steal. When we talk about Christian values, this shows unity between the Orthodox and Latin Catholic worlds. We have different interpretations of God's commandment, the great historic mission God tasked us with, but still what we have in common, I shouldn't quite say it in those words, thou shalt not steal or kill. And it's not the American Constitution that draws us close, but it's the fundamental rules of Christianity. Right now, we get a lot of jeering, if not gloating comments saying that Europe was punished. You know, but I don't want to talk about that today. The thing I would like to say, that it's a lesson to the entire Christian Europe, both Orthodox, absolutely. Okay.
Up in flames. The second church in Paris to be attacked by arson in less than a month. On March 17th, a fire at St. Sulpice, known for the movie Da Vinci Code, was attacked. You probably remember that quite clearly. In fact, we talked about it just a few weeks ago, not only that attack, but the numerous attacks on churches and Christian establishments throughout the world. Have you seen a rise in hatred against Christians, patriots, and conservatives lately? It's not your imagination. And this is just another nail in the coffin in our way of life, ladies and gentlemen. We're being attacked all over. Christian phobia is on the rise. The hatred for righteousness is on the rise. These images are absolutely unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen. To be quite honest with you, there is something strange in the air all day. And now we know what the dark matrix has been up to. Another church, a historic monument, a national monument up in flames. This isn't an accident, ladies and gentlemen. This latest string of attacks against churches in France especially isn't an accident. They're finding relics of satanic behavior, upside down crosses, desecration of communion. This is an attack on all of us, ladies and gentlemen. And this is the symbol for our cause. This is the new 9/11 for Christianity. Probably one of the most well-known churches in the world, Notre Dame, ladies and gentlemen, is no longer here. Gone, just like that. Built in the mid-1100s. It took 100 years to build, ladies and gentlemen. And while it's been attacked numerous times in its history, this is probably the most devastating, catastrophic attack ever.
So there we are. I could go on. I will put that in the description below. So there's no doubt in my mind that the West has turned its back on its Christian heritage and is committing a kind of suicide. Now, the person who talks about this, and I've been reading his book from time to time, is Douglas Murray, and he talks about it in this short video, which I've chosen. He's not, as before someone kind of points it out, he's not from Praga University, but he's a thinker and writer, quite a deep thinker, who writes for the well-regarded British conservative publication The Spectator. So let's just, if I can find it, let's listen to this.
The civilization born of Judeo-Christian values, ancient Greek philosophy, and the discoveries of the Enlightenment is staring at the abyss brought there by its own hand. To put it starkly, Europe is committing suicide. How did this happen? It's a complicated story, but there are two major causes. The first is the mass movement of peoples into Europe. This has been going on steadily since the end of World War II, but sped up massively in the migration crisis of 2015, when more than 1 million migrants poured into Europe from the Middle East, North Africa, and East Asia. The second, and equally significant, is that Europe lost faith in itself, its beliefs, its traditions, and even its very legitimacy. Let's take a closer look at both causes. For decades, Europe encouraged people, mostly from the Middle East and North Africa, to come as temporary workers. Nobody expected them to stay, yet they did. And nobody asked them to leave, even those who came illegally. As one British immigration minister put it in 1999, removal takes too long and it's emotional. And, of course, why would they leave? The economic opportunities were far greater in Europe than from where they came, and if the work dried up, there were generous welfare benefits to be had. For a time, immigrants were allowed, even encouraged, thanks to the European commitment to multiculturalism, to pursue whatever culture they wanted. But that didn't work out well. The leaders of Britain, France, and Germany admitted as much in 2011 when David Cameron, Nicolas Sarkozy, and Angela Merkel dramatically announced that multiculturalism had failed. So, the immigrants were then asked to assimilate and embrace Western values. If that happened, European governments reasoned, all the financial costs, even the occasional acts of terrorism, could be overlooked. But it never happened, and immigration just increased. During 2015, Germany and Sweden added 2% to their populations in a single year. By 2017, the most popular boy's name in the United Kingdom was Mohammed. So, why did European leaders decide Europe could take in anyone in the world, whether fleeing war or simply seeking a better life, no matter how different or even opposed their values were to European values? The one-word answer to this question is guilt. Aren't these refugees, the thinking goes, fleeing the consequences of European imperialism? Didn't we mercilessly exploit these unfortunate people in their home countries? Aren't we the cause of their misery? Accepting them into Europe is meant to be a wiping away of this guilt. This is especially true of Germany. In allowing 1.5 million people into her country in 2015, Angela Merkel was, in effect, proclaiming to the world that Germany, the great aggressor of the 20th century, the architect of the Holocaust, would be the humanitarian superpower of the 21st. A noble sentiment, perhaps, but who pays the price? The ordinary citizens of Europe, who've seen crime and terrorism increase exponentially. Their fears and frustrations have been largely ignored, or worse. In October 2015, the German government designated that 800 newly arrived immigrants were to be housed in the German town of Kassel. Concerned residents had a meeting to ask questions of their representatives. As a video recording shows, that his citizens were calm and polite, and then, at a certain point, their district president informs them that the refugees are coming regardless of their objections, and anyone who does not agree with the policy is free to leave Germany. This official attitude, if there is a problem it's not with the refugees but with the citizens, reflects a sense of what I call tiredness. A feeling among the elite class that the European story has played out, that we've tried religion and all imaginable forms of politics, and that each has one after another led us to disaster. We taint every idea we touch, so who's to say that the world wouldn't be better off without us? Of course, only people who have no idea how lucky they are could take this view. Ironically, no one knows this better than those refugees who truly did assimilate and who defend Western values. Extraordinary people like Somali-born Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who left the Netherlands because she believed in the principles of the Enlightenment more than the Dutch did. Or Hamid Abdel Samid in Germany, whose life is threatened by fellow immigrants because he defends European values. This is the stuff of suicide. The self-annihilation of a culture. It is possible that ordinary Europeans will join their leaders in this pact, but recent opinion polls suggest that they have no intention of doing so. How they act on that intention will be the great story of the years ahead. Are we about to witness the end of Europe, or its rebirth? I'm Douglas Murray, author of The Strange Death of Europe, for Prager University.
So, Europe is dying, and there could be no better symbol of this than a fire at Notre Dame and the subsequent reaction to it. Now, all of this brings me to the question of good versus evil. Between the ages of about 17 to 21, I would probably have identified with the materialistic and atheistic messages of today's media as I did to the communist messages of the time. And then later, in my 20s, I developed an interest in Eastern spirituality, and my philosophy was one of non-dualism, in which I largely rejected the concept of good versus evil, certainly as prescribed by conventional Christian teachings. Today, as I confront the realities that of today, I've modified that view somewhat and recognize that evil does exist and is walking amongst us. The recognition of the rise of psycho and sociopathy, as well as the recognition that the human species is on the way out, or human civilization at the very least, has made me more morally and ethically conservative, and I certainly reject any form of moral relativism. So to understand this, I went to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a Christian and a conservative, and certainly not a moral relativist. So Solzhenitsyn knows the nature of evil better than almost anyone on the planet. But he says, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Now this took me back to a book which I read about 30 years ago, which I really identified with at the time, called No Boundary by Ken Wilber. Well, in some ways, looking back now, it's largely sort of New Age psychobabble, but it does have something, I believe, to tell us. So Wilber describes what he calls a spectrum of consciousness, which is essentially based around where the individual draws the line between self and not self. So the ultimate mystical realization is of unity consciousness. That's an identification with, I would say, universal consciousness. We are all connected. So there's no division here between self and not self. And then he goes through a kind of hierarchy of someone who can identify it, and yoga might be a representation of this, of identifying with the entire organism and distinguishing between that and what what is not part of our organism. And then we go through then identifying with the ego, or the total organism, he calls it the centaur, and the environment. So he uses this to describe the possible spiritual evolution of the individual seeking freedom and the various forms of psychological therapy and religious and mystical paths that go with each of these stages. But I would like to use this to illustrate a point, not about the individual and about enlightenment, but to illustrate a point about Western consciousness as a whole. So in every society there is evil and bad things go on. A healthy society will not suppress this, but realize that it is an inevitable part of being on this earth as human beings, and that we hold both light and dark within our hearts and souls. A healthy society can recognize this and deal to the dark parts. Every institution of human beings contains both light and dark, right up to institutions like the Catholic Church, which contain both good as well as unspeakable evil. Christianity, after all, threw up the Sermon on the Mount, which should be a guide to anybody, any one of us. It also gave us great philosophers, think of Thomas Aquinas and others, as well as great mystics such as Meister Eckhart. But on the other hand, it also gave us religious wars, it gave us the Inquisition, and in the modern setting, rampant sexual abuse of children and paedophilia. So the postmodern approach is to throw out the baby with the bathwater and argue that mortals can somehow come up with something that's better than the traditional approach. But Christianity gave us do not steal and do not kill. So what happens when we throw out the Christian baby with the bathwater? I would argue that rather than embrace all aspects of the human experience, we've now entered a stage of human evolution, or I would prefer to call it devolution, where society is stuck at the very lowest level of Wilber's spectrum of consciousness. We have a society which refuses to embrace its own shadow, those aspects that we don't like within ourselves, and it projects it out onto others. It's an atmosphere of incredible anger and hatred, in which those who are the most hateful among us are ascribing hate speech to others, who are often pointing to the very uncomfortable aspects of human life today. So, and we're even in this country about to get legislation to kind of enshrine it in law, to kill hate speech. These voices have to be excised and exorcised and include philosophies and religious messages that have for millennia served to provide some form of social cohesion within a society beset by contradiction, while at the same time sin and perversion walk victoriously on the street. And the most satanic practices and views are now put on a high pedestal as something to follow. At the very least, we are incredibly uncertain times. At the worst, we are devolving and moving towards the end of human civilization and quite possibly extinction. So I would argue that as we career towards our common demise, that we not try to search for some new man-made structure in a world without structure, but hold on to that which, with all the imperfections of anything connected with human beings, has helped to sustain humans for millennia. I'm not putting in a plug for Christianity per se. We could just as easily look to the ancient philosophers of Athens or any aspect of what I would call the perennial philosophy. So put in a different way, how about at the edge of extinction, only love remains? Thank you. This is Seymour Rocks from Down Under.